Ooh.
Hello, everybody. We got a few people in here. We'll let
Hello,
some people
hello.
trickle in. We're starting on time, which is very peculiar for us, but
We're
we
one
love
minute
it.
late right now.
Oh, well, 1 minute into it.
Yeah, that's true.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Today's Q&A is going to be a fun one. It's going to be filled with a lot of questions and answers. Hopefully, that's what you came here for. We're excited. I'm Zach, one of the co-founders of tinyhouse.com.
And I'm Jason. We're brothers, if you couldn't tell, but
It's the glasses, but
yeah.
yeah, we've been doing tiny houses for a long time. We were in the industry for over 10 years and we built over 100 custom tiny homes. We had a TV show based on our family business for about 4 years, did about 40 episodes, each on its own unique custom tiny home. That TV show is called Tiny Luxury. And since we've been out of the tiny house actual building industry for the last 3 or 4 years, but we've been doing this tinyhouse.com platform that's all things education. And our goal is really to provide a lot of unbiased information and education to everybody out there who's interested in tiny homes, from building them to living in them to renting them and everything in between. So that's really what our goal is. And one of our main ways that we provide a lot of unbiased education is by bringing in a lot of other experts from the industry. So different builders, different insurance agents, different designers, and legality people who are just pushing advocates and so on. So there's a lot of different kind of aspects across the board of different experts that we bring in to speak about different topics, which is largely what our event next week is going to be all about. It's just literally, we'll barely talk next week, but we're inviting a bunch of really, really knowledgeable experts that are just going to share a wealth of information. So we're really looking forward to that, but that is not why we're here today. We're here to have a fun Q&A, and I'm going to turn on the chat. I'm not sure if the chat is on, but the chat should be on now. And if you guys, let's see, if you guys could drop something into the chat box. Yeah, awesome.
There
We
we
got some
go.
highs, got some hellos, and some yeses. Actually, not even
Okay.
any hellos.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, Kay? Hey, Ran. Hey, Soren. Hi, Violet. Rock. Love it. Love it. Awesome, you guys. Well, our real goal here is to answer all of your questions. We have a few questions queued up and, some topics that we could totally talk about, but our primary goal is answer your questions. So if you have any specific questions, you guys can just start dropping them into that chat box there, and that way we can start answering your questions. In the meantime, we can start just chatting. You see Kay Anderson, she's actually with Precision Temp, which is a really great tankless water heater company. They're over on the East Coast. I'm blanking on the exact state, but that's okay because they can ship anywhere. And we actually have had experiences with some other tankless water heater companies when we were building over those 100 tiny homes. We had probably like 30 of them. We used this other type of water heater in about 40 or 50 different tiny homes. And we all of a sudden just got wham hit with this major 30 of these units. They all just went out. And we were like, what are we going to do? And so we were trying to like file a claim to the actual company, but the company serves a bunch of different, it's just kind of it was definitely on the lower end of tankless water heaters that serves the RV industry. And what we realized is that tons, like thousands of RVs were having this exact same problem. And since then, we actually found, and that was not Precision Temp. That was a different company. I'm not going to name them, but it was a different company.
And they're a big name. They're like Zach said, they weren't like the most expensive, but they're a reputable enough brand. I mean, almost every RV you see on the market has one of these in it. And so we were using them because it was like the mass market product that was supposedly tried and true, tried and tested. But like Zach said, they all of a sudden just started going out on us like crazy. And so that's what led us to Precision Temp.
Yeah, so Precision Temp is really reputable. They stand behind their product, and they also are really easy and fun to work with as well. So Definitely give them a check if you're looking into it. Kay, you can drop your website in there. I'd have to look it up right now, but go for it, Kay. You can drop it in there. Anyways, we can jump on to some of these questions. We're getting some of these dialed in, so awesome. Cincinnati, Ohio, that's where Kay and Precision Temp is based out of. Cool, thanks Kay for dropping that in there. In 200 feet ADU, how much window is needed to create enough light, and how high of ceiling to create good headspace to make space not feel like a dark cell? Very good question. So that's obviously going to change, somewhat opinion based. Those aren't necessarily like, factual. There's no clear right or wrong. It's a little bit more in the gray zone area, but totally get the question and kind of the point of it there. Our goal was just always to create as much light with as many windows as we possibly could. But with that said, obviously windows can be expensive. It also can change kind of the aesthetic, different places to hang stuff on the walls and so on. So we would definitely recommend, at least one good size window for each space. So like if you have a living room, definitely a good size window there. If you have a kitchen, good size window there, even if they're pretty close to each other. And then like a bedroom or loft area, at least one window. Also make sure you have egress up there. So that's either skylight or some sort of window, depending on your setup there. So yeah, one good window per space will make it feel not too closed off. Make sure it's like a pretty good size window too. And then ceiling height, like I said, that's somewhat opinion based. Like depends on if you're really tall or if you're really short. But just for an average person, our under loft, from the floor to under the loft, I believe it was on average around 6'6". That was, since we did everything custom, we always changed everything. We didn't necessarily do always just one set standard, but it was always around 6'6", 6'4" to like 6'8". It was pretty standard of what we do for the underside of the loft. And the loft doesn't always cover the entire kitchen. It generally would go over the bathroom and then over a portion of the kitchen, and then some of the kitchens also open it up to the higher space. And if it's an ADU, John, you could probably clarify, John, if it's on wheels. If it's on wheels, you will want to make sure that you stay to the minimum or to the maximum height allowed. But yeah, if it's not on wheels, you'll have more flexibility there, but make sure that the structure looks proportionate and whatnot. But generally, anything that's two-story there, so like a loft, you're gonna have much more restricted head height. But something that's kind of more like in the living room area and there's nothing above it, you're not gonna have to really worry about the head height. And oftentimes in tiny homes, at least on wheels, there's, in like the living room area or whatnot, there's even more head height than just a standard room. So yeah, let's see. Do county building departments view tiny house on wheels as RVs? If so, is that why they can't be residential zone property? So that's a good question, David. So certification in tiny homes on wheels, it really depends on how you had it certified. So if you literally had it certified as an RV, then it technically legally is an RV, but the county and the local jurisdiction might not actually recognize it. And the other tricky part and trouble with RVs is that you technically can't legally live in them for more than 49% of the year. So if you're going to live in it for more than 49% of the year, or if the county believes you're going to live in it for more than 49% of the year, they can still balk at it and give you some hassle, even if it is zoned as an RV and so on. If you zone it as like a park model RV with the different ANSI code, then that does open up a few different types of options and so on. But it's not necessarily that RVs can't be on residential property. They can be parked there. Obviously, there's probably some restrictions, definitely dependent on where you're at. They just can't be technically lived in more than 49% of the year if it's an RV and whatnot. But there's some really cool initiatives happening right now in the legalities of tiny homes and tiny home advocacy and so on. that like you'll hear about like in the Thea Talk on Friday afternoon. Make sure to attend that one. It's going to be really impactful. So
Next Friday, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, next Friday. During the actual event, it's one of the sessions during the event, and it'll be Dan Fitzpatrick, Brad, and Lindsay will be on that session. So let's see here. I've been involved with co-housing for many years. Stick-built custom complexes are just too expensive. What do we think about boxable tiny homes? I think that's the main part of that question, but boxable, I don't have any personal experience with boxable. It does seem like what they're doing is pretty cool, and what they're trying to achieve is pretty cool. Housing, affordable housing at scale. I do think that there are some, specific issues with whether it's zoning or whatever it is, but they're working through that. They're actively working on trying to get their prefab license in every single state, but that's on the state level, so they have to work through every single state, and I think they've only knocked off a couple of those. Right now they're doing it as a park model, I believe, or something like that. And then yeah, that's pretty much the general gist of it.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is great. There's a lot of room to improve still, and a lot of work that needs to be done before it can really be implemented. And there's tons of other companies that are trying to solve that, beyond Boxable too. Boxable gets all the headlines with the press and whatnot. But there are some really other cool, companies working on solving that as well. But in general, it's a great concept, and it will hopefully be able to cut down, some of the costs for, complex type of buildings with multiple stories and units pretty tightly packed in there. So we'll see how that goes. But like even in things like one-off homes with modular or prefab units coming from out of like a factory type of setup, it's still not quite to the point where costs are dramatically less than being built on site. It's always talked about that they are, but by the time you actually work through all the details with a prefab company, you end up spending about the same, if not more. So obviously then your benefits are a little bit less construction waste. You have maybe a little bit of less time to build, but the benefits aren't still quite there to like justify it outright yet, and that's why you still see so many stick-built homes being built. But hopefully there's some progress going to be made there over the next couple of years. So
cool, definitely, yeah. That's a big topic though. I guess factory built housing, I mean, if it can achieve more affordable housing, that's amazing, that's great. But like Jason said, there's a lot of factors that happen outside of the actual factory, such as like site improvements, utilities, and then also just like system development charges that the city or county charges to literally just have the right to build there. And some places that's as high as like 60,000 or more per unit or per house. And so it adds up really quickly. And even if you get the structure built relatively cheap, there's a lot of outside expenses. So
Yep. Yeah, and just to keep, not to hound on that too much more, but if you think about it, the only cost you really can shave a ton off of is labor. You're still going to buy all the material for the same size of a house. And yes, hopefully your labor can come down by building it in a controlled environment and having some sort of tech built into your facility. But if you can shave 30% off of your labor costs, that's great. But when you add that labor line item into the full cost of construction, development, all those things, it's just a small portion of the entire cost to build something. So that's why it still hasn't quite justified itself yet.
And there's some bulk purchase savings that you can get, but it's like there's not like that much room margin there. So
we can on.
So washer dryer, again, that's definitely a personal opinion thing. If you're talking like for short-term renting it, it's probably not as big of a deal if you can get a better floor plan. If you're talking more for like long-term rental, like I know my wife would definitely love to have a washer dryer. Like that's just how she loves to live her life. There's tons of people who use laundromats and whatnot. So definitely a preference thing, you know, and whatnot. So you might be able to get, if it is long term, you might be able to rent it out for like a little bit more, but then you also have to deal with if it potentially breaks and so on. So a lot of different things like that. I would definitely recommend though, like a washer dryer combo unit, but just make sure that it's one that has good reviews on drying really well, because there's a lot of the combos that don't quite dry all the way, and that's not fun.
If you collapse that, will that show more up here?
Maybe.
There we go. Yeah.
There we go. Let's see. Not sure what.
I think she was talking about the
okay.
boxable. Yeah. So
okay. Yeah.
Loft space. So typically, John, you were asking about how much space in a loft. That if you're talking about a tiny house on wheels, you're really just going to be constrained to that maximum height. And typically, if you do a height below the loft of around 6'6", which in our experience has been kind of the minimum comfort level before you kind of start feeling like you get a duck under there for the average person, that is. Then you're typically left with about 3.5 to 4 feet in the loft to the peak.
The highest point.
The highest point. So that's kind of just the nature of it when you're confined to that maximum height for a tiny house on wheels. Obviously, if you're, like Zach was saying, if you're working with the ADU, you have a lot more room there. So that's kind of the minimum, is like that 3.5 to 4 foot. Obviously, the more you can get, the better, but then you're going to be shrinking down that space underneath the loft. So you just got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and then also we recommend like as thin of a mattress as you can get, because a lot of mattresses are 8 to 12 inches nowadays, and obviously they're very comfortable to sleep on, but that removes so much headspace. If you have a 3'6" peak and your mattress is a foot, now you only have 2.5 feet above your mattress, and that's no bueno. But there is a bit of talk around building above that 13'6" standard height, and we would just strongly recommend doing your research if you're going to go above that. Some states like Colorado allow you to build a 14'6", and you technically, there's some caveats, but you need like a permit and I think a travel route type of a thing, but it's like a $20 permit, I think. And there's different ways that you can build a little bit higher, but that does limit some things and whatnot. But if you're only going to move it once every couple years, it might be worth the hassle. But just like I said, definitely do your research on where you're going to be building. Any tips on where to put a tiny house on wheels? Communities go like hotcakes. Soren, it's definitely going to be location dependent. If you're wanting to live in the South, like there's options over there. If you want to live in the Northwest, options up here and whatnot. I definitely am a big advocate of, obviously finding a nice community is great, but if they're all gone like hotcakes, just pretty much going door to door. If you like a certain area, go see if you can get in touch with some of the owners in that property owners in that area, and see if you can park in their property and whatnot.
And then we've seen people have pretty good success with just hopping on Craigslist or other community platforms and posting that they're looking for space, number one, but also there's other property owners that are already looking for someone to hop on their land with a tiny house or RV and they lease it out. So I'll definitely check some of those community type of those mass market community type of places like Craigslist that aren't specific to tiny homes, but everyone's using them. So usually you can find some pretty good options there.
Well, yeah. And Sonia, software for designing tiny home, I would suggest like Tiny Easy software. They got some pretty cool, pretty good and relatively easy, I believe, software to use for newbies like that. But if you also want to use like SketchUp, there's a couple different ones, or if you're wanting to get your plans like designed by an actual architect or somebody who's done it quite a bit, We know quite a few different designers. We can help with that and different options like that, and so on. Sometimes the more technical architectural plan sets and so on, if done by an actual tiny house designer, can help a ton if you're going to be doing like DIY. So we would definitely recommend that because it'll help you understand the process of what you're doing, because something like SketchUp isn't quite as easy to explain sometimes. And then also, yeah, then you don't really have anybody to talk to or whatever about it. And also, if you are planning on finding a builder to build it, a lot of builders will design it themselves, but sometimes builders, if they design it themselves, they will technically just put the cost of designing it inside of the actual purchase price. I mean, it's just a part of the business model, which is great, and so on. So, but we like the idea of having your own plans, bringing it to different builders. You can bring it to multiple different builders and get them to price it. So that way you're not just going to a builder and saying like, hey, I want this, that, and the other, and I want this, that, and the other. They could come back with two totally different tiny homes. We've seen it happen so many different times. Whereas if you give them a set of plans and say, I want this tiny house built, how much does it cost? They'll give you a much more accurate price point and you'll get what you want. So
Yeah, like Zach was saying, we have tinyhouseplans.com that we're creating for the community as well. It's one of the big questions we constantly get asked is like, do you have resources for tiny home plans that we can buy and then build off of? And that's what we're starting to curate at tinyhouseplans.com. And we just opened up our architectural services. So, taking our 10 years of experience in tiny home design and building and being able to apply that to custom plans for anyone that wants to go that route. And so you can check that out with the link that we just posted in the chat there.
all right, let's see.
Yeah, I mean, as far as refrigerators go, it's kind of, if one of them is 11 cubic feet and it's the same width, and I'm guessing it's probably a little taller.
One is probably the 3 cubit is probably like
a little shorty.
Yeah, what do they call those?
They're like apartment size fridges. Yeah, I mean, I've never heard really anyone say that they have too much fridge space. It's one of those things that you just, if there's space left, it just gets filled. And so I would always opt for as big of a fridge as you can fit in your compartment there. And so yeah, I would take a look at that bigger one for sure. The 3 cubic foot is like, it's gonna be really small. It's probably yay big. It's definitely probably one of those little tiny apartment ones, and obviously it probably doesn't have a freezer either. So I would keep in mind, making sure it has a freezer section in it as well.
Rock, I'm not 100% certain what you're meaning as far as foundations beneath the subfloor, but then you start somewhat talking about like insulation and thermal bridging and so on. That's a pretty wide and broad question. But as far as like insulation, thermal bearing, thermal bridging, and whatnot, there's quite a few different options that people are doing. Oftentimes people will do like the spray foam underneath. There's some talk on both sides if people like spray foam, people who don't like spray foam. But I think that there's some healthier spray foams than others, but it's still not necessarily like healthy. At least once it's off gas, it's not too bad. And then you definitely are always going to want a vapor barrier between your, like, at some point between your floor and the like insulation and everything there.
The vapor barrier won't help with thermal bridging. It's literally just to keep moisture from coming up from the foundation up into your home, into your flooring. And so that won't really help there. But typically underneath the foundation, inside the joist or the post and beam, there'll be insulation in there. Then you can always insulate the sides of the foundation. And so there's some options to do that.
Yeah, and being in BC, Canada, I'd highly recommend checking out the different Canadian builders that we have speaking. So we have like Teacup Tiny Homes. There, she's a great designer and builder up in Canada. We also have Fritz, and we have Minimally Stay, and I'm not sure if we have any others, but like Fritz, I believe is going to be doing a talk on insulating and so on, being in Canada. So definitely don't miss that one. That one's on the 27th. So they'll do a bit more of a deep dive with some Q&A and stuff. So so Edgar asked if we're involved in tiny construction only in California, or do we also look into other states? So Edgar, I guess there's quite a few new people on here as well, but for everybody, I'll just do a quick another little intro. So I'm Zach with tinyhouse.com.
And I'm Jason.
And we've been doing like tiny houses for like 10 years. We had a construction company. We built over 100 custom tiny homes. And the last few years, though, we stepped away from the construction company. We've just been actually doing an educational platform, tinyhouse.com, online. And so we don't actually build any tiny homes anywhere, Edgar. We don't construct them in California or other states, but we do try to provide a lot of unbiased education to everybody in the industry who's looking to go tiny or looking to build tiny or rent tiny. So there's a lot of different kind of areas and spaces and topics that we cover, but we're not actually doing any physical tiny house construction anymore. So cool. And then we'll keep rolling into these. That was inside of like the Q&A thing. So the chat or the Q&A works. Let's see here. What should we just do?
Yeah, so John talking about how in California and pretty much every city and every state, the cities versus rural areas, county kind of situations, they do have dramatically different zoning and legalities on what you can build and what you can't build. And just as John, you're pointing out, in the cities, they give you a lot more red tape and a lot more requirements of what you can and can't build compared to being outside the city. So that is definitely something to consider when you're looking for a spot to either build or place a tiny home. And typically also in the city is more expensive as well. So there's definitely pros and cons, but that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, for sure. All right, yeah, John, you're right about the some of the prefabs you can, and that's also definitely dependent on quality and who your contractor on site is and who your prefab company is and so on. So there's a lot of different aspects there and whatnot, but there definitely are occasionally some prefab savings that you can have, but don't some people come into it thinking like, oh, if I do prefab, I'm going to save like 60%. And it's like, no, not necessarily, because there's a lot of costs outside of just that. And so they might save, kind of 60% on it, but then they still have to pay for like the SEC fees and a lot of different, like the site development and so on, and it can add back up or whatnot. So you try to use Tough Shed for base. Hold on, but yeah, so John, it's definitely going to be all based off of the building codes that state specific builds to, but almost all of them build to what is more or less basically called the IRC, the International Residential Code. But like some states like California, they call it like the California Residential Code and so on. And pretty much all the states have adopted the IRC, but some just change the name more or less and have a few different specifics. But it is going to be very specific on energy efficiency. And, you'd have to have like really good insulation in 6 inches to abide by some of their like code requirements. I believe like the floor is at least like 30, and I think the ceiling is now like 36 or something like that. So
yeah, each state kind of takes the IRC code and modifies it to their own requirements that they want. Obviously, some states like Texas are are going to be way more lenient compared to like our state up here in Oregon. They take the IRC and double it basically. And so building up here is much harder. Yeah, and tiny homes on wheels, you pretty much are forced to use like the maximum efficient type of insulation per inch. So on like a 2x4 wall, you can get I think it's about 7 for every inch. You can get 7 R7 out of every inch, so you can get up to about 21 insulation in a 2x4 wall. With spray foam, and that's pretty much what you have to do to even get close to abiding by the energy code there. And a lot of states you can still do 2x6 walls with typical bats insulation, fiberglass bats. So that's kind of where that's at.
Yeah, and energy efficiency is definitely one of the big ones. That's actually one of the main reasons that all kind of standard residential construction has gone to 2x6 walls, because technically 2x4 walls are strong enough to support the average 2-story, even 3-story home, and they have for years and years and years historically. But because the energy efficiency codes were requiring like so much more stud bay space, they switched to the standard of a 2x6 stud wall, which then inside of like a tiny house, like switching to a 2x6, now you're losing like 4 inches on your entire inside, which definitely changes a lot if you're going to be stuck at that 8'6" width, or even your ceiling height, like we were talking earlier. If you're going to switch from like a 2x4 rafter, depending on how your setup is, to a 2x6 rafter, definitely is going to change, your head height by 2 inches. When sometimes that 2 inches makes the difference between bonking your head or not. So a lot of different kind of factors to consider like that. But if you're going to try to build something like a tough shed to the standard codes, you're going to have a pretty tough uphill battle, but just because like the structure is not quite built the way that the energy codes and the like structural codes and so on require. So let's see. Well, thanks, John. We appreciate the kind words there on our tiny homes on our website. We love sharing different tiny homes, and also that's one of our favorite things. If you guys found a new tiny home and it's not on our website, or if you're not sure, definitely email it in to us, and we'll do our own kind of write up on it, and we'll post about it. So we love sharing tiny homes and just inspiring people and so on. So, and we're getting to the Edgar read my mind, but we're getting closer to the last question. So if you have any questions and you're on here, just type them into the chat box and we'll chip away at it as soon as we can. Okay, so Kat actually asked a question. I don't know if you guys can see it when I click the answer live question, but Kat asked, what do you think about the A-frame as a tiny, so I'm guessing as a tiny house? If it's like a tiny house on like a foundation basically, or like on a pier pads, and it's more for like short-term rentals, it can work out all right. One of the big tricky parts of A-frames is that there is a bit of wasted space all around in an A-frame, whether it's at the very peak or in the smaller corners down on the sides. That's one of those things that just, happens with an A-frame. And so, doing something like on a trailer, that's not going to work out super well. I don't think. You're going to lose a lot of your space, but I'm not sure if Kat, you're meaning like on a trailer or what specifically you're meaning, but they can look cool as like a tiny little like tent type of thing when you're doing a short-term rental.
Yeah, they definitely have an appeal to them as far as like a cozy cabin goes. Obviously, like Zach said, you just lose a lot of head height. So making sure you build it big enough that, when you actually come in from the sides to a standable head height, that you still have enough room in there for everything that you want inside your A-frame. But they're pretty awesome for sure.
Definitely.
Steven's question up there.
Yeah, let's see it.
So Steven, you're wondering, with a drop deck custom built trailer, yeah, you can connect the subfloor directly onto the frame and the flashing and insulation below. How do you deal with plumbing? A shower drain needs to be below, so how do you go about this? So do you go below the trailer? Yeah, so that's one of the challenges, but that's primarily how we built our tiny homes as well. We have used drop axle kits. So basically, the top of the actual trailer frame is right when we put the subfloor, the framing right on top, and at that point, you pretty much do your plumbing and any electrical work, but typically plumbing, really similar to how you would in a slab on grade foundation. So you can build your walls and put temporary subfloor in there, but before you really close it all up, you need to basically secure all your plumbing in there, have the drains in the proper locations, have any any of your water lines be able to run through. Basically, it's through the joist system of the actual trailer frame because you're not building anything, and so. Most of your most of your plumbing can be within that trailer frame, the I-beams and whatnot. But yes, things like P-traps for drains and water tanks and whatnot, they oftentimes do protrude down below that flashing. So oftentimes you have to cut the flashing, drop a tank in, and custom, reflash around your tank or around your P-trap. So there are P-traps that are more linear. So instead of dropping down from it, coming up, they basically just, you can come out of the drain like a quick 90 and do a horizontal P-trap. They might be called SureFlows. Can't quite remember what those are called, but
Knife gate?
no, P-traps, like the linear P-traps.
Sorry, I was reading. I totally was off topic.
So yeah, that's one of the challenges of having those drop axle, drop deck trailer frames, but it saves you solid 6 inches of head height, and so that's pretty worth it. You just got to deal with your plumbing, and oftentimes, yeah, like you're saying, like I mentioned, you do have to drop below that underside of basically the bottom of the trailer framing, and typically you want to keep anything that protrudes underneath the trailer as close to the axles as possible. Up towards the front is a little bit better, but in the back, you definitely don't want things hanging down too far, because that's where, if you're going over bumps or anything, that back of the trailer is going to hit something. Whereas if you keep it close to the axles, it's going to always be at that height. From
like a pivot point like this, he's saying. So.
Yeah, exactly. So you just want to keep it closer to the center. If you do need to protrude down from the trailer. And
quick little pro tip on plumbing, specifically on the freshwater lines, make sure you always have a drain, like to be able to drain the water lines. That's one that a lot of people don't do, and you can have freezing issues or whatever. So obviously, when you're not going to use the tiny home for a while, you can shut off your water and you can drain your lines if you have a drain in them. All right, we can keep rolling through. Edgar, very cool. It sounds like you're a tiny home builder in Florida and you've got an incredible design. Love to hear that. I mean, that's, as far as if you can copyright or patent a floor plan, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if you like technically can or whatnot. I know like in some industries, like in clothing and whatnot, like there's only certain amounts of like clothing styles and things that you can do. So unless you're like introducing a new tech into it or something like that has some sort of new use case for it, it's really hard to like patent clothing or whatever. For example, I'm not specifically certain on like floor plans. Something that we kind of found was like, you're not necessarily gonna have a lot of people who are just specifically going to like try to rip you off. And at the end of the day, like if somebody in Washington builds something pretty similar to you, like what happened to us a lot in Tiny Heirloom is we'd come up with some sort of crazy design, and then occasionally somebody else would try to replicate it, and it always kind of was like a subpar replication. A couple people created like something really cool or similar, whatnot, but for the most part, our biggest competition was people who were actually building other types of unique tiny homes and other types of unique floor plans. So obviously really depends on what specifically you're meaning that you're wanting to protect and whatnot. But for the most part, like our mindset on it is like, if you do it really well, you're gonna have a hard time finding somebody else who can execute just as well as you can on it specifically. So, but yeah, I mean, um, I think that trying to be hush hush about it is going to hurt you a lot more uh, than just like boldly marketing it and like telling everybody about it and just showing everybody. And like if it's a specific new use case, you can't always, as long as you can show that you're the first to do it, you can always patent that type of stuff later. And then B, also you can say like the original X, Y, and Z, whatever it was. But I think if you just try to like, always get NDAs from anybody who sees it and always do all that sort of stuff, it's like nobody's really going to hear about you, nobody's going to learn about it, and nobody's going to share about it. But if you're like, posting it on all the tiny house directories and whatnot and just really blasting it out there, it's much easier to get a name for yourself there. So, but just my 2 cents, and I don't want to tell you how to do your business, but favorite floor material and stiffness and sound. Oh, it depends on how much you want to spend, John. There's a lot of different types of flooring material and also use cases. I mean,
there's like I said, this is kind of all over. A lot of it's preference. Just having something that's nice and durable, is obviously preferred. Engineered flooring obviously has its pros and cons, but it's definitely a decent option. It's pretty lightweight, has some real wood on top, and pretty good engineered underneath that top layer of real wood. So that's a pretty decent option. We've used cork boards before, cork flooring before, and that one's pretty awesome. They're lightweight, they have great sound benefits, but durability is not the best on cork. So obviously every single type I feel like has a pro and con to it, so it's really kind of use case and preference. I would just say stick to some of the main ones and whatever's most in line with your use case.
Tiny home shed conversions. I think some people do really good jobs at tiny home shed conversions. My personal preference, and it's probably because we learned it from our father's dislike in remodel. I don't really love remodel, and I definitely don't love remodeling a brand new thing, basically. Like personally with a shed, if you know what you're doing, building a shed is like a couple day job. It's not like it's like this big massive undertaking to build a shed like that. And unless that shed perfectly fits your use case, you're going to be doing some sort of rework or remodel or reflashing and siding stuff that you poke through the walls, like venting and stuff like that. So that's just my 2 cents on shed conversions. Sometimes it takes more work to undo the original thing and build it new, or remodel it basically, than it would have just to literally build it the way you wanted it from the first place. But that also depends on your skill sets and some of that sort of stuff, and your patience level as well. But yeah.
And that pretty much goes for the same question right below yours, which is John's talking about ADUs, that he was recommended to do a garage conversion rather than a standalone ADU in his backyard. And I would say that's one of the biggest downsides, is that you're just already confined to a specific size of whatever that garage is, and then you're gonna have to deal with everything from electrical, plumbing, whatever is already there. You have to deal with it, and you got to figure out how to take what's there and rework it to work as best as you can to the new ADU. And typically that always requires some sort of compromise, and they might be small, but they add up. And so that's probably the biggest downside. But obviously you're going to save a lot of money doing a garage conversion, or you have the opportunity to save money since you already have the outside shell and the structure already there. Same thing with obviously why people do home shed conversions, is just because the shell is already there. But then you don't have the freedom and the flexibility to kind of really design it and build it how you want. So those are probably the biggest cons there.
And things like, there's going to be a already poured concrete slab in there, and now you got to somehow figure out how to get the plumbing in there, and that's going to require cutting into it and refilling in all the different things. But yeah. Sorry, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce your name, but Higino or something like Higino. Oh, that could be it. Let's see, electric marine macerator toilets. We've used macerator toilets occasionally here and there on residential homes, mostly like if the basement needs to pump pump sewer up. I'm not positive specifically why you'd be looking to do it on a tiny house. Getting that 1.5 inch piping drain, like the sewer pipe, might give you some benefits on making it smaller underneath your tiny home, but like the main benefits, some of the best benefits for macerator toilets on actual construction is like they have the pump built into it, and you can like pump it. Literally, you can all sewer generally just goes with gravity, but with the pump and whatnot, you can send it against gravity. So that's the main reason there. And then in like a marine case, like just to chop it up and get it out of there, basically. So I'm not positive. Maybe you've sent another. Don't see anything else down here, but yeah. No direct experience with it in a tiny house, and also I don't have like an exact use case in mind of why I would mess around with it.
Yeah, David, what are your thoughts on making a tiny house on wheel, a permanent structure on a pad using tie downs and skirting? Yeah, I mean, I think that's if you're planning on not moving it for a while, definitely do that. As far as legally converting it to a permanent structure, I think is a whole nother topic rather than just the actual physical side of making it more permanent. I'm guessing you're talking about more just like the actual physical side of making it a permanent, kind of attached to a foundation. And that's, yeah, I would say that's not a bad option. If we've seen people do that where they take off the wheels and the axles and post it up on some, whether it's post and beam or some some concrete blocks, like kind of a makeshift foundation, and tie it down. That's definitely an option for more if you're planning on not planning on using it for a while, removing it for a while, that is. So yeah, we've seen that work well, and I think it's a good option.
We also big advocates on skirting. Like back when we do our tiny homes, that was like a part of the warranty, like it was required that people did skirting. It saves a lot on maintenance down the road. It'll help a ton with like energy efficiency. You get a bunch of benefits out of skirting. So I mean, obviously energy efficiency depending on what the skirting is, but we would recommend some sort of like insulated type of skirting. And that's, there's a lot of different reasons. Keeps animals and rodents out. It kind of reduces the amount of just kind of like junk buildup down there and so on. So, and just things getting bonked and storing stuff under there, and oftentimes people store something under there and tear something out when they're trying to pull it out or shove it in. So John, it's definitely going to be dependent on your exact use case for a composting toilet versus using a sewage pump. Composting toilet, there's a lot of good benefits with that and whatnot, and there's going to be a supplier at the event that's called Compo Closet, and they've got a really great way to deal with composting toilets and whatnot. Are like, as far as like personally, if I were to use a toilet, I want it to be as minimal maintenance and minimal upkeep as possible. Like I just want it to keep working and never have to like change the toilet bag or change the whatever it is. There's so many different types of toilets out there. If you are going to get a composting toilet, like there's some definitely better ones like Compo Closet and so on. But
yeah, typically we just say like, I would, unless you're wanting to be truly off grid or need to be truly off grid, the composting toilets are just not worth the hassle in our opinion. Like, just don't go that route unless you need to or have to. And that's just our honest opinion, just because, yeah, it just creates more headache, more issues, and
limits a lot of things. Like if you're wanting to have a short-term renter come and just like rent your tiny house, now you have to like somehow explain to them how to use this composting toilet. Yeah, or just a guest in general. Now you have to go have this conversation with them that is generally not the most pleasant. So
but there are some good options for, and we've had, we put plenty of composting toilets in our tiny homes in the past, depending on the owner's use case. So it just really depends. Another option is just, having a typical RV flush toilet that goes down into a blackwater tank, and you can easily have that flushed out periodically. If you can't tie it into a city, sewage system. So that's one of the other options a lot of people do.
Yeah, we're getting down to the second to last question, I think. So if anybody has any more questions, you can drop them in. We only have a few more minutes left anyways, but do it and then we'll kind of keep going.
Here,
so yeah.
John says he's on city council in Petaluma and pushing for ADUs to meet state housing goals. This happening in other cities and states. That's awesome.
Yeah, super cool. I definitely think that it is happening. I don't know specifically to what extent. I'm not on any city council or anything like that, but I know like up here in Portland, Oregon, we're just outside of Portland, Oregon, but Portland, Oregon, they've been pushing really heavy on ADUs the past 5 to 10 years, probably something like that.
Yeah.
We don't really have great like tiny house on wheels ADU options right now, but there are definitely, I think, some incentives and stuff like that for ADUs, like actual on foundation permanent structures like that. So.
And most cities they basically, like you're saying, they require them to meet the typical state housing and building codes, and then they usually give some allowances for things like lofts or shorter stair systems, and so they basically make it more practical, like in a actual from a physics standpoint. So that's what we've seen in the past. Yeah, they follow a lot of the typical housing codes, and then kind of give you some little bit of grace in some of the areas that just make it more practical to actually have an ADU.
Ceramic geodesic domes. I came across something. I'm not sure if it was this exact thing. I'm just gonna look it up real quick.
We're not exactly sure which one, but yeah, we've seen some of those domes that are
popping up and whatnot.
Cool.
Super awesome, yeah. As far as like actual kind of practicality and energy efficiency, I mean, that's going to depend on like the walls and the glass and all that sort of stuff. But in general, they're super cool ideas, and like I would love to go stay in one of them as like a vacation and just go like experience it and whatnot out in nature. I feel like those fit a lot more in nature. If anybody hasn't looked it up, it's like the geometric kind of round dome, I believe, unless I'm looking up something wrong, John, but in general, I think it's the kind of the round dome, but each kind of like there's a lot of different the triangle panels like all around it basically, and some of them are glass, some of them are all glass, some of them aren't really. I think it fits much better in like a nature area. I don't really see them fitting in very well like in a city, but definitely more of an experience, I feel like. But yeah, everybody, well, I think we'll wrap it up with that, but super awesome having you guys all here. I'd love to see in the chat real quick who all is planning on joining the event next week. Whether you're going to be watching the recordings or whatnot, I'd love to hear it. Crickets. Oh wait, there we go. Now it's all popping in. Cool. Well, yeah, you guys can go to our link, which is right here. If you don't have your ticket, definitely go get your ticket and whatnot. We'd love to have you guys join us. You'll get also a basic access to our tiny house community, which is kind of like a glorified Facebook group that's much more organized and actually filled with important and technical questions and topics and so on about tiny homes. So definitely you'll want to join that for sure. And then yeah, we have a lot of things in store for the next 6 months even, but this event that's coming up next week is really where all of our focus is. We're super excited about it. It's going to be a really good fun and informational and educational event this coming next week. It's going to start, we actually have a pre-show on the 27th, so that starts at 3 p.m. Pacific time on the 27th, and then the main show is really on the 28th and 29th, but the pre-show is going to have a few different speakers. I'm not entirely positive why we're doing it, calling it the pre-show, because it's basically going to be even more, possibly even more in-depth conversations and so on the 27th. So all of it is going to be really impactful, really important. You definitely want to tune into that for sure.
And it will all be recorded. So if you have a ticket or a membership and you can't make some of the sessions or all of them, we're going to be sending out all the recordings to you afterwards. So don't fret about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Rand, for dropping that newsletter sign up in there. We also have a few different things that we send out in our newsletter. We send out inspiration, new tiny homes in the database. We send out cool, interesting topics and articles that we write about and so on. So definitely, if you're even slightly interested in tiny homes, you need to be on that newsletter there. So it's all things that you need to know and whatnot. And we don't just spam, we don't send out a bunch of things unless an event is coming up and you haven't bought your ticket. We want to make sure you know about it. So but other than that, yeah, we really appreciate you guys being here today. It was filled with awesome questions. Loved it. It's always a good time connecting with all of you guys, and glad we were able to chat and answer some good questions here. So
absolutely. Yeah, thanks everyone. We'll see you guys next week.
Awesome. Thanks so much, you guys.
See ya.
Can't wait. See ya.